Welcome again today to GPS and God's Prophetic Surprise. We're happy to have our team together, and we're not going to take a long time to get into the text. So we are just thrilled that you're with us, and find a Bible. We're in Revelation chapter 7, and we're going to be done with Revelation chapter 7 today. Before we're done, we're going to read the last verse, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes.
Amen.
And we're looking forward to that. As we tape, we've had 17 kids die in Florida, and some in Niger, and all around the world. And my mother is having surgery in the hospital as we speak, down the street. We've been with her all week, and just to watch her face be drawn, someday this is going to happen. Anyway, just if you haven't been with us, or if you have, we'll still review. We had quite a discussion the other day, which we're not going to repeat, about the 144,000 and the great multitude. That's on the last show. And we can agree to disagree. There's different viewpoints out there in the church. Some people think 144,000 and a great multitude are the same group down here at the end of the world. Others of us think the 144,000 are the group that preaches to the great multitude, and they come in. Either way, the great multitude is a wonderful crowd at the end of the world ready to go to heaven. We're agreed on that. So turn to Revelation chapter 7, starting with verse 9. And what I want to do today is just to go down the phrases and symbols that are in the rest of this chapter, and just do as quickly a soundbite identification where we can. And then we can go on to the seventh seal and the trumpet the next couple weeks. Ready to go?
Ready.
All right, Pastor Shifra, Dr. Jon Paulien, and here we go. And after this I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. So someday people will come from everywhere, which means the message has to go everywhere. I mean, it's going to come to Mongolia, it's going to go to the tribes and the highest mountains, it's going to go to everybody, right? People are going to come from every tribe. They will hear the truth.
And I think I've changed my picture of this a little bit in recent years. I think when I first read that, I was thinking every nation, tribe, language, and thinking that there were going to be people in every one of these nations and cultures that would end up acting and looking like me, dressing and all the rest of that. And I'm convinced now that God is ahead of that game. And I've been places where it was clear the Holy Spirit was there before I got there. And to realize that God has his people not only in every nation, tribe, language, but I think even in every religion. I'd like to suggest that God is at work in every religion.
Amen.
I would also like to suggest that Satan is at work in every religion.
Yes.
And I think what we sometimes tend to do is compare the best of our religion with the worst of somebody else's, and you come away feeling pretty good with that. But as a frontier missionary type, I'm learning to look for the places where God is already working in other cultures and finding surprising things when you do. So I have the feeling that 7-9, when it happens, is going to be a surprise to most of us. The kind of people that are there, what they're going to look like, how they're going to dress, etc. I think we're going to have a lot of surprises. This is God's prophetic surprises, so here we go.
There you go.
That's one of the big ones.
I have a story real quick of a surprise that really happened. Samoa has a history of legends, and my parents are born and from the Samoan Islands. Well, history tells that one of our high chiefs said that one day the person to take over the kingdom will come from and the word used means horizon and sky. And when the missionaries, the Christian missionaries, first came on a ship through the horizon and the sky, the people on the islands, this is a pagan, island, Christianity had not come as a religion, but the presence of God had been clearly working, because when the Christian missionaries arrived from the horizon, the skyline, the leaders of the islands took it as the fulfillment of the prophecy that had once been given in the form of a
They've been
legend.
looking for that all
That
along.
this is the kingdom that is coming. And so now today, if you go to Samoa, the dominant belief and faith standing is following Christ.
Amen. Great story. I was going to just throw in the phrase, C.S. Lewis uses the phrase, you too. You know that phrase? Where C.S. Lewis says, you know, you're on the train and you talk to somebody and find out that they love Jesus. And you too, you know, out of this crowd, you and I. And we see, they say, you see the same thing that I see? Yes, you too. And then becomes a bond. Even if you are completely different worlds and cultures. He was a scholar in, you know, Oxford and Cambridge. And someone else and said, you too. Then it's become a metaphor Held and I use, you know, you too.
But when you understand that God and Satan are both at work in every religion, and I think that's very, very important, because even in my own particular faith, there are people who have long stories of how they were abused or mistreated and so on, and how can this be God's place when these things happen? Yeah, that's true wherever you go. So that's why Seventh-day Adventists at least have been cautious about ecumenism, because the danger when you try to unite religious organizations is you may end up with the worst of both, you see. But we should not let that legitimate concern keep us from finding kindred spirits wherever we can. And I've found them in some of the most surprising places, and that's what I see when I see this text.
Do we need to say something about standing before the throne and the Lamb? Anything more we should say about that? You have identified different places where the geography is a little different. Sometimes Christ is on the edge of the throne, around the throne. Here he's in front of the throne. Anything we say about that, or we're going to go on?
Well, it says there before the throne and before the Lamb. So the perception is that this goes back to 5:13, where the Lamb is on the throne, and where the worship is to both the one on the throne and the Lamb. So the Lamb has joined the Father on his throne, as it mentions in 3:21. He's joined the Father on his throne, and now these people are before that throne.
Yes.
So Jesus promised in Revelation 3:21 that the one who overcomes will sit with me on my throne, even as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. This seems to be the beginning of fulfilling that statement of Jesus in 3:21.
And it says they're standing. So we've kind of followed that theme from chapter 6, verse 17, where it says, who will be able to stand? These are standing. And at least I've used verse 10, where it says, salvation belongs to our God. They are standing because of salvation in God. We're okay? I'm with that. All right with that?
Excellent.
So they're standing in front of the Lamb. They're wearing white robes.
Just an observation.
Sure.
I've met people who sincerely believe that whenever you pray to God, you should be on your knees, and your head should be bowed, and your eyes should be closed, and all of that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I fully respect folk who believe that way and who practice that, and I myself like that as well. Whenever the situation is right. But when I'm in an elevator, the situation isn't right, and yet there are times I need to pray. And here you see an example of people in the presence of God. It doesn't get any more pray-y than that. All right? They are standing right in front of the throne.
Right.
They are right in God's literal, physical presence, and they're standing. They're not on their knees. Back in chapter 4, the elders fall down on their faces.
Well, and in verse 11, the angels do.
Yeah, you see. So those are appropriate too. But there are times and places when standing before the presence of God is also appropriate. And so I let conscience, maybe that's a surprise again, but I let conscience guide people on those kind of things.
Just scars on my pastoral shoulders here. I had two churches in Southern Oregon years ago as a young pastor, right out of seminary. And I came to one church, and they had read the quote in Ellen White where she jerked the coat of a young man at Bottle Creek and said, kneel down. This is where the angels kneel before the holy God and veil their faces with their wings.
Yep.
This is the proper position always.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, they were kneeling for every prayer in Sabbath school and in church at the potluck.
It makes perfect sense.
One Sabbath, we counted 9 prayers between beginning of Sabbath school lesson, end of Sabbath school, church. People were mad, just plain mad at this young group, my young adult, brand new Christians. So I go, what did I know? You know, proper position always sounds pretty complete. Boy, people were upset. Anyway, my father was a pastor in St. Helena down by PUC, and I was down there telling him this little pastoral dilemma I had, and he said, Arthur White is here. Arthur White was, the grandson, was getting well from a heart surgery. So we drove up to Arthur White's house and said, I'm going through hell here in this church. Do you have any insight for us? He said, just wait for the 3rd volume of the Selected Messages. We'll answer this. When Ellen White said that, she was referring to the main prayer in the worship service. When she had the blessing for the meal, she did not kneel. So we had to get the context. And there's a number of other quotes in that passage. And in the Bible, there's kneeling, there's falling down, there's standing, there's eyes wide open, there's eyes closed, there's walking on the shore. There's all these forms, whatever's appropriate at the right time.
And for those who are interested in what Ellen White had to say about it, statements like when you're walking down the street, when you're washing dishes, and you're doing that, you can be in constant communion with God. So even if we didn't have the context that Arthur White referred to for that particular statement, that's tremendously helpful. It would be clear that whatever she meant by always didn't mean always in the Greek philosophical sense.
That's right.
It meant always, at least in certain contexts. But when you're walking down the street or you're in an elevator, kneeling and closing your eyes is not safe, you know, especially if you're crossing the street.
I have people that call me for prayer while I'm driving, you know, and my first instinct is to close my, no, I can't do that. And a wonderful young lady from Utah calls me almost every Saturday night on my way driving home and just, can you pray? Won't tell me what that's about, won't tell me what the crisis is, just pray, Pastor Dan. And then she'll call me next day, your prayer worked, you know, so, okay, whatever it was.
There is something about kneeling down, and I had a young adult come tell me he chose to be in the OT program in Loma because he heard a story of a woman who couldn't use her knees to kneel down and pray anymore. It had gotten to that point with her knee health. But an occupational therapist helped her get her health back in order so that her knees were strong enough, because on her knees she just felt closer in that intimate connection with God. And so even on LLBN, I've said, you know, prayer is not so much a posture or a program or anything else that starts with P, but it is a personal relationship with God, you know. But it is still, some people feel like they want to kneel down.
Let's go to the white robes. Now, we will get to this more other places. Revelation 19 has it, but it says that they were wearing white robes. There's been a debate for a long time, and you all know that I'm related to a Venden. My mother's a Venden, and so Maury Venden was my uncle, my mother's cousin. So he went all over the world really preaching on Revelation 19, that the wedding garments that are given for people to wear, it says, are the righteous acts of the saints. Are the white robes, usually we think of wedding, something you put on. It is something that covers you. And so you're filled with sin, and your robes are righteousness of filthy rags, and then you're covered with justification. But more, I wanted to say that it was sanctification. When he had one Friday night in General Conference in New Orleans to preach, he preached this. That's sanctification. And he has support in Christ's Object Lessons and Ellen White also. So what is it? Is it forgiveness and righteousness from Christ that is apart from us and you put it on? Or is it something that the Holy Spirit does in us and is in us, and our white robes are actually part of our character? Or both?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if there's a false dichotomy, although there is a difference between justification and sanctification. But if it's sanctification, it means that you've been justified. You can't be sanctified without having first been justified. So I tend to lean towards both. What do you think?
Well, I think the I like to say in class, the biblical answer to most of our questions is yes and no. And in a question like this, it might simply be yes. I think we have to realize that this is all metaphorical language. And we're mixing metaphors like wild when we do this. We're used to the language, it kind of means something to us, but justification is legal language. It's the court declaring that you're innocent of all charges. Sanctification is sanctuary language, talking about setting apart for holy use.
Yes.
Then what were some of the other terms we were just using? Forgiveness is banking language. You know, you have a debt and it gets forgiven and so on. When you mix all of those, you know, and you start debating justification, sanctification, etc., and you're losing track of the original metaphors, you can end up thinking it's biblical and it's not. Clearly, when it comes to the robes, the Bible uses robes. One image is covering. Okay, so this is dress metaphors. It can be covering. On the other hand, if the robe is of high quality and is very clean, it can represent that you did good. You see, you are seen as somebody who has obeyed, who has done the right thing. Yeah. So that dress imagery can be used in more than one way in the Bible, and therefore both images may be correct, and we may be making too much of them when we draw fine lines.
Well, and Moore felt that way. His punchline, which he would shout out when he got to that point, because Moore always preached very casual conversation. That was very important to him. But when he got to this, he would say, you know, the robe is free, because it says the robe was given to them to wear. So Moore wanted to say that not only was justification, because most people would say justification is a gift, but sanctification you kind of work out in your own life. God helps you, but you're in here doing it. Moore wanted to say, yes, it involves our will and our actions, yes, but it's a gift of God, just as much as justification was a gift. And Moore really, and I asked him about it because we had family dinner, and I said, why are you preaching? He said, it was the one note he wanted to give. He said, I have a one-string violin, and I'm going to keep preaching that victory is just as free as forgiveness and justification. Anyway, that's what he wanted to do.
Well, I knew your uncle and appreciated his work a great deal. So I certainly think that he was on a right track with a lot of that stuff. But the concept that I learned to use after listening to him and so on was the idea of imputed sanctification.
Yes.
That I think the problem is we often limited justification to simply forgiveness for the sins of the past, forgiveness for the bad stuff you did. But our good stuff isn't good enough either. So justification needed to be broadened to cover both, and Romans 3 does this very, very clearly. So you're not only imputed you have your ticket, but you also have your fitness, your readiness. Both of those are gifts of God. And when it comes in that way, then it reduces the arrogance, the pride, and accepts that this is God from beginning to end.
Where do you want to go with the washed in the blood of the Lamb? Where do you want to go with? There's more metaphor.
Yeah, that's a metaphor we'd probably just soon not talk about in today's generation, right? Yeah. The very idea of it kind of grosses people out, I think people would say. But what did it mean back then? It had the idea that somehow, through the death of a substitute, something could happen for us that maybe couldn't happen otherwise. So that's the idea behind it, that you take the blood of that lamb and wash these robes. Now, in practice, that's not going to get them clean, but it's mixing metaphors once again. But the Bible does it, and so mixing metaphors is nothing wrong with it. It's just helpful that we understand what we're saying when we say it.
But the idea of washing, Psalm 51 has purging.
Yeah.
So these are just metaphors, getting it clean.
Yeah.
I can remember I went to interview Smuts Van Rooyen when I was in college. Smuts Van Rooyen he was a new hot speaker. He was fantastic. And I got assigned to write the article in the paper. I went to interview him, and I said, how do you want to be remembered? And he talked about a shirt. He said, you have a shirt and it's dirty and it's filled with dirt, and you go and you wash it in soap and you rinse it with water and you hang it on the line and wind go through it. And at the end, the soap is gone and the water is gone and the wind is gone, but the shirt is clean. It's been washed by God. And we may not remember everything. He said, people may not remember what Smuts Van Rooyen said, but if the shirt is clean, good enough. Jesus washes it. What about the palm branches? It said they're waving, holding palm branches in their hands. As we tape this, a couple weeks from Easter, and we're planning we're introducing our new children's pastor that Sabbath, Patty from here. Patty, you know Patty.
Marufa.
And so we're having all the kids come dancing down the aisle to her with their palm branches. What's the meaning of palm branches? Real quick, just a minute soundbite here. If any.
In my culture, or
tell us. I have no idea.
Well, palm branches are significantly used in the Polynesian culture. We use every part of the palm tree, from the root to the fruit, of course, and the palm branches are used to weave baskets. They are significantly part of our culture. So when I look at this, they're holding palm branches in their hands. I'm wondering, what was the author in Revelation intending for us to understand about this? And that's for you.
Yeah.
Worship, it's celebration, it's honor.
Well, I think the only parallel in the New Testament is the triumphal entry of Jesus.
Yes.
And the palm branches there, that the carpet of palm branches was a way to express humility before great power. So it was a royal kind of metaphor. In the Old Testament, and that seems to be the background for this, is Feast of Tabernacles. They would build housing out of palm branches, tents out of palm branches for that special season. And the Feast of Tabernacles was the climax of the Jewish year, so at least biblically speaking. And so here in Revelation, that would indicate you've come to the end. This is the final, promised land, all the rest of that.
Okay. Terrific, and look forward to being a part of that. Loud voice, and they cried out in a loud voice. Over and over again we've had that in Revelation. It's not just a voice, but he hears a loud voice. Is there a significance to that? These people are wanting to be clear in their worship about salvation belongs to our God. They want to do it loudly. Anywhere we want to go with that?
Yeah, well, maybe it was a prophecy of Dan Smith. You've got a loud voice.
Yeah, because we're proud. We're standing up for what we believe. But is that the context here? Is there anything more that we should?
Well, it's often in Revelation associated with God. You have Jesus with a loud voice in chapter 1. You have an angel with a loud voice in chapter 5. You have another angel with a loud voice in chapter 10. So often in Revelation, it's associated with the presence of God, and that's the case here.
Even in Revelation 14, you have an angel with a loud voice, saying with a loud voice.
Yeah, that's right, proclaiming
God.
the gospel. Yeah.
We've mentioned this verse already now. The salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So I suppose this is parallel to fear God and give glory to Him. Jesus said it is finished on the cross. After all salvation, it belongs to God. Ellen White says in the volume Faith and Works, if we take our best works and offer them to God as having any part of our salvation, the angels consider it treason before God.
Wow.
So here salvation belongs to God.
Yeah.
It's not, I preach it, I say it's not copay, You go to the hospital and they want you to pay a little bit, and I have a little skin in the game here. When I'm trying to get someone to go on a mission trip, I want them to pay something, even if I have to go find some donations. I want you to pay something. This is not potluck. Salvation belongs to God. Any more we want to add to this here?
There's really nothing to add to that, is there?
Yeah.
It's all about God.
All God.
Amen.
All God. Okay. We've already talked about bowing down. I was going to bring up that. And then we have the angels are now singing. And the four living creatures, amen, praise and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. So we've had these sort of praise verses. Chapter 5 has all the praise songs. Here's another one. And the elders now.
You notice this with worship, it's always talking about God and what He has done.
Going over the acts
So
of God.
that's the definition of biblical worship, at least, is It's about God and what God has done.
Amen.
We sometimes make worship about us and what we ought to do. And there's time and place for that, of course. But true worship is always God-focused.
Beautiful.
Let's jump down to the Great Tribulation. He asks, where these people come from? In verse 14, and it says, they are they who have come out of the Great Tribulation.
And then it says they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb, which we just talked about.
Which we were talking about.
So interesting that it says they've come out of the Great Tribulation, they have washed their robes. Where did they wash their robes? In the tribulation or after the tribulation?
That's how they got out of the tribulation.
I mean, that's, that's righteousness by faith there, perspective. But when one reads this verse, these are they who have come out of the Great Tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb.
And the have washed is...
And they have washed is perfect.
Is looking back, yeah. Because it's interesting, it says, these are the ones who come out of great tribulation, present tense, and they have washed their robes, probably aorist, a point in the past. So, you're putting the two in the right order.
Is the tribulation, because we say the great multitude includes everyone who's ever going to be saved? So does this, the great controversy, they lived in our world, that's a tribulation, to be in a battle with Satan and this world? Or is that a uniquely last day time of trouble, great tribulation?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to go back to the fifth seal, where you had those souls under the altar who had died because of their faith in Jesus. And the anticipation in the fifth seal is that there are others who are yet to die. So there's a tribulation in the past, and there's a tribulation at the end. And so I would take this to be the end time tribulation.
You're talking Revelation 6, verse 9.
Yes, yeah, the fifth seal. Mm-hmm.
So the people who have come out of it, who are wearing the white robes, are those who have endured the final, worst wrap-up battle. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. All right, now we come down to the last few verses. Verse 15, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. Is that what we're going to do in heaven? Day and night, sitting in temple worshiping? Is that metaphor? That our hearts will be in worship mode all the time?
Well, that day and night echoes chapter 4, where the four living creatures were day and night singing, holy, holy, holy. It also echoes chapter 12, where Satan accuses day and night.
Day and night. The smoke of the torment goes up day and night.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what's the metaphor? What do we mean?
So it's probably similar to forever, except it has more of a continuousness. Forever is just sort of looking at the big picture, but the continuous is that it's on and on and on forever. So this is similar to that, and forever in the Hebrew sense is not forever in the Greek absolute sense.
Will we be, the Bible says we're going to do gardens and build houses and all of that. So are we going to be in the temple? We're going to be doing gardens? Or how do we put that together in the last 30 seconds?
Well, I see here in verse 15 it says, and he who sits on the throne will spread his tent over them. I liked the Feast of Tabernacle reference there.
Yeah.
So God spreads his tent over. I think it's metaphorical.
Over all of us. Mm-hmm. We've got to go. At least we covered most of the last part of Revelation chapter 7. So we hope that you'll come back with us. Now we're going to wrap this up and go into chapter 8, which will be the seventh seal with the censer and the thunder and the lightning and all of that, and the silence in heaven for half an hour. I think you'll enjoy this show. Be with us. This is GPS. We're glad you're with us today.